All right. I'm so glad to be here with you all today. Since we are on Zoom, just in case if I start speaking too fast or glitching out or anything, somebody just wave, like make it real obvious. As accessibility is really important to me, and I want to make sure that everyone can hear me all right. All right. So, first, I'd like to thank my colleague, Reverend Julian, for inviting me to speak with you all today. It is General Assembly today, and I believe that they are traveling. So, I'm very glad to be here with you. And I once read that before one goes diagnosing oneself with all manner of maladies and disorders, one should first ensure that they are not simply surrounded by jerks. Now, we're going to be talking about mental health today, and I'll probably make some jokes, but I do want to be clear that this is a serious topic. If this brings something up for you, I encourage you to connect with me or a member of your spiritual care team after the service. I don't want anyone leaving here feeling alone or unsafe, all right? And I will share my email address in the chat so you can reach out to me as well. Now, for the last 3 or 4 months now, I have been engaged in a feud with my neighbor. And it all started with a pink skeleton and some rainbows. It all started with scaring the pink skeleton, and then it became about my rainbow flag, and then a rainbow sign on my door, and then a rainbow pillow on my porch swing, and so on and so forth. Now, the whole story is fascinating, lots of twists and turns, and I'll share where you can read the whole thing. But what I want to talk about first is the impact. Now, I live in Knoxville, Tennessee. I am a religious educator and Unitarian Universalist pastor, and I studied social work in undergrad. So, nervous system regulation, psychology, neurodivergence, all of those are some of my special interests. I've researched, written, and spoken at length about the impact of anti-LGBTQIA plus rhetoric on the mental health of our queer youth and young adults. I've been involved in queer advocacy in my community for over 2 decades now, and I take every opportunity I can to advocate for this community, for my community. I was also, once upon a time, a queer kid who grew up in the closet in Knox County, Tennessee. I graduated from Carnes High School the year we had both a gay straight alliance and teachers who felt emboldened to tear down our gay straight alliance signs. And I've been in therapy consistently since the month I turned 18. And that's been one of my most consistent spiritual practices ever since. I've had the same therapist for most of that time. She's a no BS LCSW who once, years ago, said to me, deadpan, really? You're going to kill yourself over a crappy Tuesday? I did not, in fact, end up killing myself over that particular crappy Tuesday, and that type of candor is something I really need in a therapeutic setting. I pride myself on staying on top of my mental health and being unapologetically real because I don't think enough people are. I'll be honest with you that about 3 weeks and six HOA letter complaints from my neighbor in the Scarin versus HOA saga. I texted my therapist on a Friday afternoon and I said, I'm safe, but it's been a whole week of crappy Tuesdays and I don't think I'm okay. Now, at this point, I knew that the harassment was targeted based on my queer identity. I could see the other homes in my neighborhood with similar but not gay decorations left undisturbed, and my personal education and experience told me that this was more than likely targeted identity-based harassment. Now, I know my rights. I knew that this was a federal crime. I knew that no HOA actually has the authority to to act in such a way. And as a Unitarian Universalist, I knew exactly how to dig into the HOA's bylaws and governance and prove it. I knew I was right. But here's the thing. Nobody with authority cared. My landlord, who is someone I've known since I was a child, told me in the beginning that if this became about my pride flag, they would fight for me. Then they told me to take down my pride flag because they fought for me and they lost. And they told me if I suspected harassment or discrimination, I should contact the leasing company. The leasing company told me to comply with the HOA as they only manage my unit in my neighborhood and have no formal relationship with the larger HOA or other tenants, nor any way to confirm if these complaints were real or even actually coming from the HOA. They encouraged me to contact the Knoxville Police Department, which I did, who told me there was nothing they could do unless it escalated to physical violence, and to contact the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. That begs the question, of course, will a federal agency in Tennessee in this current political climate give a single flying you know what if I feel unsafe in my home because of all of this? If you guessed that the answer is no, then give yourself a little pat on the back. So, with all of this going on in my life, I found myself with an emergency 4 o'clock on a Saturday therapy appointment. I was absolutely assured that I was not in the wrong. I had dozens of UU ministers, religious educators, chaplains, and advocates in my phone at my fingertips, and over 1 million people online on threads reading along to this story, agreeing with me, telling me it was messed up and it shouldn't be happening. But here's the thing. Yeah, it's wrong. Yeah, somebody should do something about it. Yeah, none of this ever should have happened, but it did, and it does. And I didn't kill myself over this situation when it came up a few months ago, when it impacted my mental health like that. But the thing is, we have queer youth who do every single day. Oof. Last week, I read a post from a colleague noting that we had critically, historically low enrollment of youth at this year's General Assembly. And I didn't comment, but in the back of my mind, I thought, how many of our passionate, brilliant, wonderful, queer, Unitarian, Universalist youth and young people have we lost to suicide lately? I know that there are statistics on that, but I honestly didn't want to look it up. I didn't want to know. Based on my own personal research and background, I knew that the statistics were probably not great. And then this past Friday, when I listened to this year's Berry Street essay presented by the Reverend Sarah Lawal, I learned that my suspicion was right. This January, one of our Unitarian Universalist youth named May, who was a wonderful, incredible transgender girl, lost her life to suicide after targeted harassment. Even with all of my own personal resilience, all of my privilege, all of my access to resources, this situation made me feel like I would rather die than continue living in this hateful, homophobic culture. Now, y'all, I'm an adult. I have all of these resources. Our kids don't always. Now, I want to assure you that I am okay. I'm preaching about this today because I am okay. And because I know better than to preach uh, from wounds that are still gaping. This wound is a little tender, but it is not gaping. I have lived with depression since I was 10 years old, and depression will be a close acquaintance of mine for the rest of my life. This story is not actually about me. This story is about kids, queer kids in Appalachia and beyond, like in Idaho, where May lived. Kids who deserve to feel safe in their homes. So I know we're on Zoom, but before I continue telling this story, I have a question for you. You can do show of hands or a wave. How many of y'all consider yourselves an ally to the LGBTQIA plus community or a member of the community yourself? See some hands in the sanctuary. Love it. Excellent. All right, now another question. How many of you over the past year have hung a pride flag in front of your home? I see one very excited hand in the sanctuary. I love it. Fabulous. And a couple here on Zoom too. Awesome. We're going to come right back to that, okay? So, a couple weeks after that emergency therapy session, I met one of my neighbors who I hadn't met before. We had a nice chat about our gardens. And when I told her about the HOA situation I had been dealing with as a renter, she, as a homeowner, kind of blew my mind. She said, "What HOA?" She said, "There are no meetings, no regular communications, no newsletters." She said she thinks it's just the people who live next door to me. And she thinks they're probably racist too because they used to be really nice to her until she started bringing around her black partner. Beloveds, that was the moment I realized that I was not simply surrounded by jerks. I just lived next door to one. So I did what any good Unitarian Universalist would do, and I typed up a memo about the situation to share with my neighborhood. And at the end of this memo, I said, quote, "Sorry for the delay in providing this notice and context. I would have written sooner had I known it was just one hateful person, not a whole full of hateful people." Now, this letter led to me meeting two more neighbors on my street who I found out are also queer and have also been targeted specifically by this neighbor for HOA violations. And just like that, it was no longer Scarin versus the HOA. It wasn't HP Rivers versus the system. It wasn't good versus evil. It was just a bunch of neighbors who had previously felt targeted and alone, realizing that there was probably nothing to be scared of because it was probably more than likely just one hateful dork being a bully behind their computer and not a whole group of them and not anyone with any real authority. So a few weeks ago, I took my dog out early in the morning and I saw that my neighbor across the street had put up a pride flag of their own. And the sight of it in that beautiful East Tennessee morning, morning fog and birdsong was enough to bring me to tears. Those tears were so different from the ones I cried in my therapist's office just a few weeks ago, telling her that this is what we mean, what queer people mean when we say we just want to exist. I put up pride flags for the same reason I argue with people in the comment section of the Knoxville News Sentinel. I do it because it is important, especially for those of us who are the most vulnerable and most impacted, to be reminded that we are not, in fact, surrounded by jerks. We are surrounded by bots. We are surrounded by misguided, misinformed neighbors whose behavior, more often than not, can be attributed to ignorance and bad theology, but not necessarily malice. And I want to point out, y'all, that 98% of the comments on your local news that are full of hate and just misery, 98% of those are bots. And the other 2% are hateful dorks with nothing better to do with their lives, with no real authority. And it is important, maybe even more important for allies to fly pride flags than it is for me and people like me. Someone in your neighborhood may need to know desperately, they may need to know desperately that they are not alone and that they are not, in fact, completely surrounded by jerks. This is especially true for our queer youth who might be living in unaffirming or unsafe environments. We may not be able to change what happens in their homes, but we can change what it looks like in their neighborhoods. We can set the tone. We can be very clear about who and what is welcome in our communities. Y'all, targeted harassment, like what I experienced here, multiplies a queer youth's risk of death by suicide by hundreds. And Having just one affirming adult in their life can decrease a queer youth's risk of suicide by over 40%. Here's one more question for you. Is that 40% decrease in risk for a child in your neighborhood? Is that worth it? Is that worth putting up a pride flag? Is it worth getting into an argument with your neighbor? Is it worth someone maybe thinking you're gay or standing up to a hateful family member? You never know who is watching and who needs to know that they aren't alone. Now, I wouldn't dare leave y'all like this. So, I want to tell you about some of the warm, fuzzy things that have come from this story. Because, yes, queer pain happens, but queer resilience happens more. Soon after I shared about this experience, followers and allies reading about my experience donated over $200 that I spent on flowers. And I used those flowers to make a rainbow walkway on the sidewalk leading up to my home. And I'll share some photos with y'all later today so you can see it. So now my home has a permanent rainbow out front. I was a guest on the Church of the Larger Fellowship podcast where I discussed the situation at length. We discussed HOAs as a tool of empire, which was fascinating. And I was invited to a local news program here in Knoxville to discuss it as well. So now, thanks to the hateful dork who lives next door to me, over 2 or 3 million people have learned about this situation, learned about pride. This is the second time I've preached this sermon, and now people all over the country are learning about pride, the good news of pride, thanks to my hateful neighbor next door. Several years ago, the then president, the Reverend Susan Frederick Gray, the then president of our Unitarian Universalist Association, that is, the Reverend Susan Frederick Gray, really, bro, this fidget spinner right here, please. Thank you. Said, "This is no time for a casual faith." And beloveds, I agree. This is no time for casual allyship. This is no time for a comfortable, casual faith or a comfortable, casual pursuit of our values and ideals. It is too late for book clubs and strongly worded letters. It is life and death. It is life and death, and we deserve life. We deserve life full of rainbows and glitter and all of the beautiful, sparkly people who make our world colorful and fun. Beloveds, may we always choose to be the ones who make the world safer, more sparkly, more colorful, and more fun. Blessed be.